Some believe that marriage is just a piece of paper, a contract tying one life to another. Yet, some contracts prove far more difficult to dissolve than others. And what would you do if you stood to lose everything by ending that contract? Would you hire another person to help you escape the commitment? Hi, I'm Dev.
And I'm Cam.
And you're listening to Criminalish, a true crime podcast where two best friends trade stories ranging from the wild and wacky to the downright messed up. So today, I will be telling Cam about the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers, which took place in Bonita Springs, Florida in 2015. Have you heard of this case before, Cam?
I don't think so.
Okay, good, because the case is messy and there's a couple of points in particular that I think you will find very interesting. And I think we'll have a good discussion about them.
Okay, I'm definitely interested to hear about her now. But before you tell me about this case, what we drinking?
So today, friend, we are drinking some XXL mango flavored wine that has been in my fridge for a little minute now because I didn't really plan for our What You Drinking segment because in all honesty, I didn't prepare well for today. But we're here and we have wine.
Right. And if you've never had XXL before, that wine is some of the strongest wine there is.
Exactly. I think these wines are 18%.
16 to 18, something like that. Should be classified as liquor.
This is true. Cheers.
Cheers. That's liquor.
She is liquor. So before we get into today's case, I want to extend trigger warnings for mentions of domestic violence and the brief mentions of suicide and substance abuse. So to get into today's case, Dr. Teresa Sievers was born Teresa Ann Grace Tottenham on November 19th, 1968, in Derby, Connecticut, to her mother, Mary Ann Groves, and her father, whom I wasn't able to find much information on or his name. But I do know that Teresa's father and mother would separate when Teresa was just 1 month old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like her father re-entered her life in any capacity based on my research.
Yeah, that's always sad because I can understand, a couple not working out, but why should that have an impact on the relationship you have with that child?
Absolutely. It's sad. And I understand, dealing with separated parents is difficult and everything, but it's worth it. It's worth having a good relationship with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
But despite this, Teresa seemed to otherwise have a perfectly normal childhood. And as she grew older, Teresa was described as a woman with remarkable ambition. It has been reported that Teresa demonstrated a commitment to the medical field at a very early age, as her interest first sparked when she was in 6th grade. And she would go on to graduate as valedictorian of her high school before completing her medical education at Ross University School of Medicine in 1996. And she later completed her residency at the University of Florida. It is also my understanding that she got married at some point during her early education and career, but I wasn't able to exactly verify when she got married or who her husband was.
Mm-hmm.
This information isn't entirely relevant to today's story, but I did want to make it clear that she was married at the time when she first started her career. Now, it is important to note that Teresa wasn't just incredibly smart. She was also described as a, quote, force of nature, end quote. Her family often referred to her as a, quote, dynamo or a spitfire, end quote. And it has been reported, quote, despite standing just under 5 feet tall, Teresa owned every room she entered, often clocking around in 4-inch heels, end quote. And as a short queen myself, I support this energy.
Yes. I have had people tell me that they didn't realize I would be so short in person, especially with virtual meetings and all of that. I've had people be like, oh, wow, you're so tiny.
Yeah. I've had that same thing. They're like, oh, you're a lot shorter than I thought you would be.
It's not about your height. It's about the way you carry yourself.
Absolutely. And if we want to go into carrying herself, Teresa carried herself like that girl. She was also known for her dedication and always having a solution, and for her passion for healing people. However, for reasons I don't really know, Teresa's first marriage didn't seem to be going very well, and it would end in divorce presumably sometime in the early 2000s as she was first getting into her career.
So we think that her first marriage lasted around 8-ish years, maybe?
Somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay.
It seems like, from what I'm understanding, it seems like she got married while she was still in her undergrad program. It was hard to find specific dates.
Got it.
A lot of my sources just talked about that she had a previous marriage while she was going through school. So it seemed like that was the case. And then that marriage didn't work out through like her first or second year of professional development.
Got it.
Yeah. But shortly after the dissolution of her first marriage, Teresa would go on to meet her second husband, a man named Mark Sievers, a nurse from Missouri and the brother of a friend of hers. And Mark was visiting St. Petersburg, Florida, when the couple started a romantic relationship. And it has been reported that Mark was absolutely smitten by Teresa. And he treated her as if, quote, she hung the moon, end quote. Which that's one I've never heard before.
Right. She wasn't just the moon and the stars. She hung the moon.
She put it in the sky.
Exactly.
Love it. Men take notes. And in 2003, on a beach in Florida, Teresa and Mark would get married. And as a family, Mark and Teresa seemed to have it all. The couple moved to Bonita Springs, Florida in 2006. They established a restorative health and healing center, and the couple would go on to have 2 children together. And Mark was described as a devoted father and was also who managed Teresa's office. He also took the role of being a stay-at-home parent to their children and described his children as his, quote, pride and joy, end quote, and being a dad as his, quote, reason for being, end quote. And to the outside world, the family appeared happy and looked like they had it all. Teresa was very successful in her medical practice, spreading her message through speeches, videos, and even hosting her own YouTube channel, as she had dreams of reaching a national audience with her wellness advice. And all this work had made her the primary breadwinner of the family. But in the medical field, she was incredibly respected. So much so that patients would often seek her out from all over the world after other treatments had failed. So Teresa's practice primarily focused on holistic living. So a combination of Eastern and Western practices to make you feel better. And this practice was very successful because she still believed that there was medical intervention that was necessary, but there was some things that you could do to aid in your own existence and making yourself feel better.
Right. And I feel like that's really powerful to blend the two together, because you do have people who are like, I'm not going to take any Western medicine and I'm going to cure my cancer with well wishes and manifestations. And not saying that has never worked, just saying I've never seen it work. But there is also a lot of proven benefits of holistic methods and holistic solutions to health. So I feel like it's really powerful. And the fact that people were seeking her out from all around the world is just a testament to the fact that she was such a good doctor.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times, especially on the internet, you hear holistic doctor, and sometimes people get scared because they're worried that it's going to be, you know, the witch doctor putting leaves in a grinder and telling you to just smoke this and you'll be fine. But holistic living is about taking care of the whole person. So it's like, yes, we can do this medical intervention, but you got to walk and you got to eat right and you got to do some yoga and stretch. And maybe you do need to go to therapy and align your chakras.
Right.
Maybe that will help you out.
Right.
But we still going to give you this medicine to take too. And Teresa was that girl. So again, potentially happy family, happy business, happy wife, happy husband, right?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, but unfortunately, like most of the cases we cover on this show, the perfect life in marriage is rarely actually the case. So despite appearances of a perfect life, testimony would later claim that Teresa and Mark were experiencing a multitude of marital and financial problems. Mark actually claimed that Teresa was having an affair and that the couple was in such a bad place financially that they were considering bankruptcy. So, with all this information and background, that leads us to June of 2015. In June of 2015, Dr. Teresa Sievers and her husband, Mark Sievers, and their 2 children were going on a family vacation to Connecticut/upstate New York to celebrate Teresa's mother's birthday. And even though it was her mother's birthday, Teresa would inevitably have to cut this trip short so she could return to the medical practice in Florida. So Mark would end up booking her a return flight home to Bonita Springs, and she would end up flying home Sunday night, June 28th, 2015. After landing at Southwest Florida International Airport, Teresa called Mark to let him know that she had landed safely and that she was heading back home. She would later return to her home, pulling in the garage shortly before 11:25 p.m. The following day, on Monday morning, June 29th, Teresa failed to arrive at her holistic practice. Mark was still in Connecticut and received multiple calls and texts from very concerned employees because Teresa would never choose to not go to work and treat her patients. So in response, Mark called his friend and neighbor, Dr. Mark. And just to separate the 2 of them, Mark will just be the husband, because remember, Mark is a nurse, but he is not a doctor. And Dr. Mark will be the neighbor, just for clarification for the next few points. So Mark calls Dr. Mark and asks him to go to the house and check to see if Teresa's there. Mark Sievers then gave Dr. Mark the garage code and told him to just walk into the house. It's fine. Dr. Mark would later say that this call was, quote, out of the blue, end quote, and he found it very odd. And it soon became very obvious just how wrong this whole thing felt. Because despite the off feeling he had, he did go over to the house to check on Teresa. He entered the garage code and walked into the garage where he saw Teresa's car waiting. He then walked into the house and began to scan the home looking for Teresa. And as he entered into the kitchen, he found her, lying face down in a large pool of blood on the kitchen floor. So, of course, Dr. Mark immediately called 911. And while on the phone with 911, Dr. Mark noted that Teresa had a massive head wound and that she was cold and lifeless. As the paramedics rushed into the scene, Dr. Mark called Mark Sievers to talk to him about what had happened. And Dr. Mark proceeded to tell him that something terrible had happened to Teresa and that she was hurt. But he purposefully did not tell Mark that at that point, Teresa was more than likely deceased. But it would be Mark's subsequent behavior of not asking how she was hurt or what hospital she was going to that really made Dr. Mark concerned more than anything. I mean, why are you not asking what's going on with your wife that you just told me to go check on?
Exactly. And I just told you your wife is hurt and they got paramedics taking care of her. Oh, do you know what happened to her? Where are they taking her? All right, I'm going to see if I can get home in like the next few hours because I got to fly back.
Right.
And then let me know if you're going to get to this later, but you also made a comment of Dr. Mark saying that whole thing was out of the blue. So was it basically like they were neighbors and friends, but they weren't that close?
Correct. I'm actually not going to hit on this later. I will talk about Dr. Mark, I think briefly at some point, but I'm not going to hit on their relationship. But it was very much like neighbors who maybe they would ask you to go get a package off their front door, but that was probably the extent of their friendship.
Like they'd never been inside each other's houses.
Correct.
Got it.
So paramedics quickly rushed over to the scene, but unfortunately, 46-year-old Dr. Teresa Sievers would be pronounced dead on her kitchen floor. The Lee County medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Coyne, later performed the autopsy of Dr. Sievers. The cause of death was determined to be blunt head trauma from multiple impact wounds to the back of the skull, and Dr. Coyne ruled the nature of the death was homicide by bludgeoning, and further found that Dr. Teresa Sievers was beaten to death with a hammer as the multiple impact wounds to her skull were, quote, consistent in size with the head of a hammer, end quote. And a hammer would later be recovered at the crime scene that had both Teresa's blood on it as well as her hair entangled in it. Her autopsy also showed that she had defensive wounds, meaning she had tried to fight her attacker.
That is so tough. Bludgeoning with a hammer. Oh my gosh, I cannot imagine just going through that as Teresa. And then also for Dr. Mark to come upon that, that's also traumatizing. I don't know what kind of doctor he is, but I feel like regardless, it is tough to see that kind of thing, especially to see your neighbor who you were friendly with like that. I can't imagine.
Absolutely. And I don't know what specific doctor Dr. Mark is, but some of my articles referenced him mentioning kind of a turning it off kind of thing to get medical help, to intervene, those kind of things. So I can't say for certain that he's a trauma doctor or he deals with blood on a regular basis, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did, given his response was so calculated in a how do I help kind of way.
Right. And I'm definitely side-eyeing the husband. However, recognizing the fact that he is clearly states away when this happened.
Correct. But you're not the only one side-eyeing the husband, Cam, because now police are like, we have a murder on our hands. Let's start collecting evidence. And they immediately are like, everything about this scene is suspicious. Namely, because nothing was taken from the home. The house wasn't even ransacked. The back door was clearly broken into, but there was thousands of dollars in cash in the house. And when I say thousands of dollars, I mean somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 in cash.
Weren't they considering bankruptcy?
That's what Mark said.
I don't know about you, but if I was struggling to pay bills and I had $40,000 to $50,000 in cash laying around, I would use some of that cash to pay said bills.
You know, for sure. Or maybe a good attorney for the bankruptcy filing.
At the very least.
We don't know what they were planning to do with that $40,000 to $50,000 in cash. That could be an emergency fund.
That's the other thing. I don't know how much money they made just from the practice and everything, but $40,000 to $50,000 in cash does seem like a lot to just have.
I agree. I think it's a lot to just have, because I think $4,000 to $5,000 of cash is a lot.
Right.
But it wasn't just the money, Cam. Mark has a very extensive and expensive gun collection that was also in plain view where it could have been taken. None of that was taken either.
Yeah, guns are expensive.
Very much so.
I'm learning that because of another case that I'm looking into right now. Guns are very expensive.
Guns are not cheap. As somebody who has gone to a show or two, guns are not cheap. Especially if these are collector's items, because I never saw the collection, but everything said that this was a gun collection, not he had an arsenal of weapons that he normally uses. Because I know those people. I know those people who have 20 guns, but they hunt and they use them, right? Versus people who buy, here's my 1912 original Midwest pistol, right? It's my understanding that it's more that.
Got it.
Than something that he's actively using.
Right. Something for display versus something he would use.
Boom.
Got you. Okay.
And then there was one final thing that police discovered that just wasn't sitting right with them. And that's that the security alarm didn't go off when Dr. Mark came into the house, even though it was activated at some point. And police are actually able to determine that the alarm had been deactivated early Sunday morning. And if you remember, Teresa didn't get there until almost 11:30 p.m. on Sunday night.
Right. And when she called Mark to let him know she had arrived, was she at home?
No, she was at the airport.
And another question about the scene in the kitchen. Was it clear what Teresa may have been doing in that moment? Did it seem like she just walked in? Did it seem like she'd been making something in the kitchen, looking through mail? Was it clear what she was doing in the moment she was attacked?
Not from my research. I wasn't able to find that she was actively doing something, but there was nothing like in her hands. There was nothing in her immediate vicinity.
Right.
Which, you're just getting home. The only thing you might have is maybe your bags from the airport.
Yeah.
But nothing was in her immediate vicinity right beside her, other than the hammer that police believe to be the murder weapon.
Yeah. The other thing I'd be curious about is whether her bags were still in the car.
Oh, we're going to talk about her bags, friend, because I know exactly where her bags are.
Great. I'm listening.
But before we can talk about bags, we must talk about the police trying to investigate this case.
Oh, Lord.
So detectives are trying to pursue leads in the case because this clearly seems to be some kind of orchestrated hit rather than a burglary. So, of course, they start with everybody's first suspect. Everybody say it together now.
The husband.
Ding, 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 ding. Mark Sievers. But he had an airtight alibi. He was nearly 1,500 miles away in Connecticut. On top of this, Mark spoke with investigators without a lawyer present and handed over his cell phone, allowing them to download its contents. Now again, if I said it once, I've said it 100 times. Never talk to police if you are a suspect, which he obviously would believe he's a suspect. He's the husband. Never talk to police if you're a suspect without a lawyer present, even if you ain't do nothing.
Right.
Even if you didn't do anything. Because also, if you didn't do anything, your lawyer will just make sure that you get a good deal for not doing anything.
Right.
You know?
And make sure they're not asking you questions where they're trying to make it seem like you did something.
Come on now. Get you an attorney. Get you an attorney. But I didn't have another place to talk about this, so we have a little bit of gossip from the phone dump. Because when investigators dump Mark's phone, it reveals that he and Teresa were, quote, very occasional swingers, end quote, and had an open marriage. And his phone contained numerous photos and videos of women that Mark had been intimate with. Now, I just want you to know that piece of information because we're going to put a pin in it and we're going to talk about it more later. But just remember that police go through the phone and occasionally they be swinging, allegedly.
Got it. It's noted. Written down.
For the record.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, okay, Mark's got an alibi. We got to pivot. And so they start looking to see if there's maybe a disgruntled staff or employee that maybe had it out for Teresa. It has been reported that Teresa's had a strong personality that sometimes came across as abrasive or polarizing. She was actually described by some of her staff as having a, quote, short fuse, end quote, and expected perfection, sometimes leading to her screaming and yelling at both patients and staff. Despite this reputation, though, many of her staff were understanding of Teresa's demeanor and claimed that this is what made her good at her job. So again, this lead goes nowhere because seemingly nobody has anything actually bad to say about Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
Which, you know, I don't love the idea of your boss yelling at you, but it's not enough to potentially put a hit on her.
Right. And I'm like, really, if you feel that bad about your boss yelling at you, get another job, like leave the job.
Absolutely. Go work somewhere else where people don't yell at you. That's perfectly valid.
Right. File a complaint with HR. Like there's so many different routes where I agree. Unless you are just generally unhinged, it doesn't make sense for that to turn into you killing your boss or you putting a hit out on your boss.
Correct. And then the final lead that police looked into was the, quote, holistic doctor serial killer theory, end quote, which was quickly debunked. Now, I did not look into this because this sounds like an awful rabbit hole waiting to happen.
Right.
And if you guys wanted an episode this week, I could not spend time trying to figure out what the holistic doctor serial killer theory is.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know at all. I didn't even look it up because I could feel that my ADHD was going to start ADHD and I was going to figure out what that was instead of finishing writing this case.
But if you do know, leave a comment. Let us know.
Please. Because now that it's done, I will look into it. But the main thing is that all of these leads go nowhere. And for 2 weeks, the case remained cold. Even though he had an airtight alibi, police didn't completely stop viewing Mark as a suspect because detectives viewed his displays of grief during his initial interview as, quote, fake and simulated behavior, end quote. They literally called my man Connor. They basically called my man AI.
Yeah.
They noted that he was highly emotional, sometimes sobbing or hitting himself in the face, and talked to his dead wife when left alone in the room. Now, I'm not going to say that any of this is not normal, but also when he was doing it, it was kind of weird. I got to admit.
Yeah, especially when you keep in mind the fact that he wasn't even asking questions like where his wife was going, which hospital she was going to, how she was hurt, what had happened, that kind of thing.
Yeah, she was looking a little sketch.
Mm-hmm.
So police are just looking for a break in the case at this point because they have nothing. And then shortly after this 2 weeks, police would receive their first break as law enforcement officers in Illinois called lead detective David with news that someone had come forward with information potentially related to the murder. According to officers in Illinois, the call was a, quote, late night phone call, end quote, that came from a family friend of a man in a small town of Hillsborough, Missouri. The tipster's name was later revealed to be Rose Gruner. According to Rose, she had overheard a conversation between her friend Angela Wright and Angela's daughter. The conversation revealed that Angela Wright was very upset because her new husband, Curtis Wainwright Jr., had left abruptly for a trip to Florida and had very oddly left his cell phone at home. Curtis had allegedly traveled to Florida to solve an IT emergency for a friend. Now, Rose didn't think much of this conversation at the time. That is until she learned that Curtis is Mark Sievers' childhood best friend. And the weekend that he made this IT emergency trip just so happened to be the same weekend that Dr. Teresa Sievers had been murdered.
Damn. Dev, I love you. I'm not going to kill your husband for you.
I greatly appreciate that, actually. I would greatly appreciate it if you not ever kill my husband.
Even if you ask me, I'm going to tell you no, and we're going to start looking up alternative options. First one being divorce, second one being marriage counseling, and then I'm going to find at least 10 more.
I love how divorce is before marriage counseling, though.
I will say, if it gets to the point where you asking me to kill him, I'm going to say you should just leave him.
You know what? That's valid.
Mm-hmm.
That's valid.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not killing your husband for you either.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm just going to help you pack all your things. We'll move in the middle of the night.
Exactly. Yeah, we make a clean break.
Exactly. You know, he'll never find you again.
Mm-hmm.
That's the vibe.
And that's what best friends are for.
There you go.
Not for murdering each other's spouses.
PSA with Criminalish podcast.
Right. PSA brought to you by Criminalish.
Trademark. So, of course, police have this tip and they hone in on Curtis Wainwright Jr. as a suspect. And this tip ultimately allowed investigators to link Curtis Wright to Mark Sievers, and detectives then traveled to Missouri to follow up and interview Curtis. During this follow-up, Curtis claimed that he didn't know anything about the murder and denied all involvement in Dr. Teresa's death. Curtis actually provided multiple alibis, claiming he was either, quote, homesick in bed, end quote, and never left his trailer, or that he was, quote, working on a car all weekend, end quote. However, investigators were able to obtain a search warrant for Curtis, Missouri residence. And when they execute that search warrant, they were able to seize his cell phone and, crucially, a Garmin GPS unit. Now, if you don't know what a Garmin GPS unit is, like I didn't know, it is a portable cellulite-based navigation device that uses signals from GPS satellites to provide location data, maps, and navigation features. And this is important because this GPS unit is most commonly used for outdoor navigating and tracking, specifically in areas without cellular service, for activities like hiking, hunting, and boating, or maybe somebody who doesn't want to be found or followed. So police seized the GPS, believing that it had to be connected to the crime scene because the tipster had previously said that Curtis left his cell phone at home when he went to Florida. But at first, the investigators were disappointed because they were told the information on the GPS was deleted and they couldn't interpret the code that was necessary to recover it. However, the police said, I bet we will spend hundreds of man hours to try to figure out this code and break this GPS and recover the deleted data. And after a few months of trial and error, they finally succeed. And when they did, they found the GPS log detailing the journey taken by Curtis Wainwright from Missouri to Florida. The data established the route beginning at Curtis Wright's residence in Hillsborough, Missouri. The route also included a stop in Cadet, Missouri, which police would later be able to connect to the residence of Jimmy Ray Rogers. Now, we'll get into Jimmy in a second. But all that you need to know for now is that his address is in this GPS and is connected to a rental car that was paired to an email belonging to Jimmy Ray Rogers.
His address is connected to a rental car that was connected to an email belonging to him.
Correct.
Wow.
Police work.
Right.
This is police work, ladies and gentlemen.
That is a lot of hours, like figuring out the code. I wonder too, because I know there are certain cases where they're able to subpoena records directly from the company. Do you know if that's something that they tried in this case?
I don't know if it's something that they tried, but I don't think these particular devices store data to a bigger, like, cloud kind of thing.
I see.
I think it's all internal. So it's like one of those things where it's like I can record on our camera and my camera will save a copy that even if I delete it, if I go in there, I can recover that file. It's the same kind of concept.
I see. Also, I'll admit, it's actually not a bad idea to use that. Leave your cell phone at home and use that. Why keep it?
Correct. Maybe he likes hunting. Maybe he's like, maybe I'll use this again.
I would get another one.
Me too. If I was trying to get away with murder. Yeah, me too.
He probably said, I can just delete it.
Yeah. Nothing's ever deleted, kids. It's always recoverable, including the thesis that you deleted. It's recoverable. You just got to go find it. I say from experience.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to Jimmy's name being linked to this rental car, Jimmy's cell phone had also connected to the GPS unit, presumably via Bluetooth, because apparently Jimmy didn't get the message that he was supposed to leave his cell phone at home.
Right. Jimmy.
So getting back into the route, the GPS then tracked the 1,104 miles south along Interstate 75 off the exit to Bonita Springs. The final destination input to the GPS was on Jarvis Road, the same Jarvis Road as the home of Dr. Teresa Sievers and her family. The data show that they arrived at the Sievers home at approximately 6 a.m. on Sunday, June 28, 2015. And police are able to additionally verify this when they pull the records for the home alarm being disabled at 6:09 a.m. on June 28, 2015.
Wonder how they knew how to disable it so quickly.
Crazy. However, after briefly stopping at the Sievers home and disabling the alarm, the pair left. The GPS then logged entries for various locations they visited throughout the day, including Walmart, where officers pulled their surveillance footage that showed the two men purchasing suspicious items such as black shoes, towels, and a lock-picking kit. And this footage also confirmed the use of a white rented Hyundai Elantra.
They went to the Walmart?
They said, we gotta make a stop at Wally World.
Where there's nothing but cameras?
Correct.
And you tried to say, I think I was home 1,000 miles away all weekend.
Correct. I never stopped in Walmart. But don't get twisted, Cam. They didn't just go to Walmart. They also went to the beach. And then they also went to the gas station before returning to the residence that evening.
I guess when you're in Florida, you might as well.
I mean, Cam, they live in a landlocked state. When are they ever going to get to see the ocean again?
Right.
May as well check it out. So after returning to Teresa's residence, the GPS data then showed that in the early morning hours of June 29th, the pair were back on the highway, headed northbound for the 17-hour drive back to Missouri. So now that the police have all this information, detectives decide to focus on Curtis' accomplice, Jimmy Ray Rogers, who was linked via the GPS and the rental car and the email address. So I'm sure the first question you guys are going to ask is, how does Jimmy know Curtis? And why would Jimmy agree to do this 17-hour trip with Curtis?
Right.
Well, Curtis and Jimmy first met and formed a friendship while they were incarcerated together in Missouri County Jail. True friendship right there.
Right.
Jimmy was actually already an inmate and met Curtis when they were living inside an open pod. Jimmy actually later recalled the meeting, noting that in Missouri, the pods were generally separated by race, and Curtis was, quote, one of the only other white guys inside the pod, end quote. He was in.
And Jimmy is
white.
Okay.
Jimmy is also white.
Got it. Okay.
Remember, one of the only other white guys in the pod.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Got it. So Jimmy was in a non-white pod.
Correct.
I see. Had to seek out his fellow whitey.
Of course. You know, he had to feel comfortable. He had to see somebody who looked like him to feel comfortable. You know?
And do we know what they're incarcerated for?
We do, friend, because I knew you were going to ask. So Curtis was in jail for drug possession, and Jimmy was in jail on a weapons charge, which seems to be like a violation of parole kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know any more specifics than that because, again, rabbit hole, ADHD, couldn't do it. And they were incarcerated together for about a year. And Jimmy considered Curtis a, quote, good friend and a protector, end quote, during their time in county jail, noting that Curtis had a background in martial arts and was a physically imposing figure, which made him a, quote, good guy to have on your side, end quote, in that setting. Which, like, you know, if I was going to jail, I too would find the biggest in there and be like, we're besties now.
Right.
We are besties, girl.
Me and you.
It's us
Stick
against the
together.
world. Mostly you.
Right. I'm emotional support.
Absolutely. I got you. I'm going to make sure that extra pudding is there for you. So after each of their convictions, Jimmy and Curtis went to different prisons, but they stayed connected and maintained a pen pal relationship and maintained a closer friendship after each of them got out of prison. So much so that Jimmy was actually scheduled to live at Curtis' house upon his release. But that plan fell through for reasons that I didn't want to spend time looking into. So since we have all this background and this connection, the police are like, yeah, we got to go find Jimmy swiftly. And they quickly do because they have his address. So detectives interview Jimmy Ray Rogers as a person of interest to initially just get background information on Curtis. But as you can imagine, Jimmy is already a felon and was barely cooperative with investigators, letting them know right off the bat that he, quote, doesn't like cops, end quote. He also denied going to Florida and denied even talking to Curtis. In what segment of time, I don't know. It's documented that y'all talk to each other all the time, but we got your jail letters.
Right.
That's all documented and part of the record.
Common sense ain't common.
Not at all. But honestly, this interview didn't even matter to police because they had already obtained a search warrant for his residence. And detectives executed that search warrant shortly after his interview. And while there, they found his girlfriend and decided to interview her as well. Now, his girlfriend's name is Taylor Shoemaker. And when the police start asking her some questions, Taylor very quickly cracked under police pressure and confessed to Jimmy's involvement in the murder. Taylor confessed to investigators that Jimmy had admitted to killing Dr. Teresa Sievers with a hammer inside her own home. Taylor then led police to the discarded evidence, which included the Walmart purchases, the pieces of Jimmy's destroyed prepaid phone, and a blue jumpsuit that was later identified as being worn during the murder because a fiber analysis confirmed the blue fibers from the discarded coveralls matched the fibers found on Teresa's body. And DNA analysis also found a tiny piece of hair on the jumpsuit matching Jimmy Ray Rogers.
Also, I just thought about this. How you going to say that you never went to Florida when we have you on CCTV footage?
Because they don't know. They don't know that they got them on candid camera.
If I go into Walmart, I assume I am on camera.
You, Cam, have common sense.
That's very true. Also, your girlfriend said, listen, I ain't going out for this.
Look, and I'm not mad at her.
I don't know what you did to piss her off. Or if she was just like, you know what? It's not worth me losing my life because my boyfriend want to do some dumb shit and kill somebody.
For sure. And I support her completely. Because I tell everybody this. Don't make me a witness for the prosecution. Because I will sing like a canary.
Right. A perjury charge? Not doing that. Obstruction of justice charge? Not doing that. No.
Look, I have decided I'm too soft for jail, okay? They don't have 1,000-count thread sheets in jail. They don't have caramel iced lattes in jail. I can't go. I'm not going for anybody. So following this surge of evidence that the police have just kind of stumbled upon because baby girl decided to crack, both Curtis Wright and James Ray Rogers were arrested, interrogated, and initially charged with the first-degree murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. So I'm sure we're all asking the obvious question here, which is, it's so odd that Mark's best friend is accused of killing his wife. That's really weird, isn't it?
Exactly, because the next question I have is, what was the motive for all of this?
You know, Cam, investigators are wondering the same thing. And you know what they figured they could do? They'll just go to Mark, right? They'll just go ask Mark. He's been so cooperative this whole time, right? However, shortly after Curtis and Jimmy were arrested, Mark stopped answering their calls. And then Mark's attorney contacted law enforcement and informed them that Mark would no longer be speaking to them and was shutting off all communication and contact with the detectives. Now again, this is not a bad course of action. It's not, because get you an attorney.
Right.
However, that's suspicious.
It is very suspicious.
That's weird.
Because if your attorney's advice is don't say anything to them at all.
Now we're going to sit down for an interview and I'm going to guide the questions and make sure they don't try to mess with you.
Right. Makes me think
there's a little,
you might got something to hide.
It's a little stanky.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little stinky. So now that Mark is no longer talking to the cops, they're like, maybe we turn our attention on Curtis and Jimmy and see if one of them is willing to flip on Mark.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to save themselves, or maybe even flip on the other in order to save themselves.
Right.
Because officers never stopped looking at Mark as a person of interest or a suspect in the case.
Right. And if anything, even if I'm looking into Curtis, I'm keeping the fact that he is Mark's best friend in the back of my mind the entire time.
Absolutely. There's no way you can forget that fact.
Right.
So Jimmy, of course, wasn't saying anything because remember, he's Mr. I don't like cops. So police weren't getting very far with him. But then they went and had a conversation with Curtis. And they laid out the mountain of evidence that they had that would put Curtis in jail for the rest of his life and potentially even earn him the death penalty because remember, we're in Florida.
Florida don't play.
Not at all. And when they present this to Curtis and his lawyer, they take a deal. And Curtis confesses to everything, admitting not only his physical involvement in the murder, but also implicating his childhood best friend, Mark Sievers, as the mastermind who hired him to carry out the murder. And Curtis would go on to reveal everything. And luckily for you, I have the order of events as presented by Curtis and confirmed by outside sources and data that the police found.
I do love it when the data lines up with the story.
It makes you very believable when the data lines up with the story. Because at the end of the day, if you didn't think that Walmart had cameras, you're not going to think about that GPS data that we've recovered and stolen from you.
Right. You thought deleting the GPS data meant they could not get it back.
Right. So you're probably not going to know about that. You're probably not going to know that we have the alarms of the security system.
Right.
We have the barcodes and the times that you scanned everything. Like, you're probably not going to think about all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And let this be a reminder that especially in this day and age, almost everything you do is being recorded and tracked.
Hello.
Now, because I'm not committing any murders, I don't really care.
I don't care. You think these devices that we just start talking to out of the blue aren't listening to us all the time?
Right.
Come on now. Be for real. You willingly carry a tracking device. I know you do.
And the police can subpoena that information from the companies.
Come on now. So before we get into the version of events as presented by Curtis, I want to give you guys a little bit of information about him, how he knows Mark, and kind of explain why I believe the vast majority of his statements, specifically the statements that line up with the data, and why his story seems to make a lot of sense to me. So remember I said that Curtis Wayne Wright Jr. is Mark Sievers' childhood best friend. They grew up in the same area, and Mark affectionately called Curtis his, quote, brother from another mother, end quote. And you know, back in the 2000s, that was the epitome of a compliment for men especially.
Right.
And this allowed Mark to confide basically everything into Curtis. Everything that was going on in his marriage, his personal life, his business life, Curtis knew about. Now, Curtis was considered a very smart tech whiz. And as we've already discussed, had a little bit of a criminal history, including serving time for drug possession. But Curtis was a familiar presence in the Sievers' lives. So much so that he worked as the IT guy for the holistic medical practice. And he would travel from Missouri to Florida 4 to 5 times a year to perform tech work for Mark. And Curtis even attended Mark and Teresa's wedding. And some of my sources even stated that he was the best man in the wedding. So again, it puts him in very, very close proximity, not only to Mark, but also to Teresa.
Yeah, because that was going to be one of the questions I had, was knowing that Curtis is Mark's childhood best friend, had he met Teresa? And I thought it was going to be, yeah, he came to a barbecue once or twice. Oh, they knew each other,
which just might make Teresa more comfortable if he was in her house unannounced. I can't say that for certain, but why else would you get somebody that she's super familiar with to allegedly break into her house and kill her?
Right. Or it could be that you would get somebody who's going to give you a discount on that killing fee, and somebody who would maybe be less willing to talk. I actually find it funny that the person who was not Mark's best friend was like, I ain't talking. And the person who is his best friend was like, ooh, they got a lot against me. Time to sing.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Exactly. So, according to Curtis, beneath the veil of a successful, perfect marriage, the Sievers' marriage was deeply troubled, marked by frequent arguing, infidelity, and financial distress. And according to Mark, he and Teresa were involved in open marriage. Remember that? Where they were very occasional swingers, quote. But I just find this to be very conflicting information, because if the marriage is open, how do you have an infidelity problem?
There is possibilities, because with an open marriage, you still set boundaries. So things can be open and you say, all right, we can sleep with these people, but we have to get approval, or no exes, or no emotional connections. So it is still possible to cheat in an open marriage if you surpass the boundaries that have been set and agreed upon by everyone involved.
Okay, fair enough. I have no experience in really honestly understanding of polyamory for real. So I will take your word for that.
I don't personally have experience, but I do know many people who are in polyamorous relationships and open relationships.
Got you. So even if the marriage was open and people are violating the agreements and boundaries set in the open relationship and there is infidelity, either way, apparently the marriage was in a very rocky place. But just how much of a rocky place the marriage was in didn't become clear to Curtis until Mark flew to Missouri to attend Curtis's wedding in May of 2015.
And Teresa was killed in June of 2015?
Correct.
So just a month before.
Correct.
Wow. And I would actually say the bigger question to me with the open relationship is not the infidelity, is how y'all rocky and y'all open. Those two don't go together.
Come on now.
Open relationships, from the ones I've seen that actually work, is when the relationship is very stable and there's lots of trust and respect and all of that. If your relationship is rocky, that's not the time to be spreading your wings.
Correct. But again, I just refuse to believe that this marriage is actually open. I don't think I said that. I don't think I made that clear. I don't believe that this marriage is actually open.
Right.
I think that Mark is cheating.
Yeah, because if the only evidence we have for open marriages is the fact that Mark was speaking to other women,
it's not sounding like no open marriage.
Yeah.
Because again, we're going to get into the claims that Mark has made against Teresa, and one of these has evidence and one of them doesn't. And we'll leave it right there for now. So, during Curtis' wedding weekend, Mark confided into Curtis the details of his marital problems, including concerns about potential bankruptcy and his belief that Teresa was having an affair and planning to leave him. Again, if this marriage is open and you're not just the one cheating and projecting, which is what I think is happening,
right,
why does it matter?
Right. Especially if you don't know who she's having the affair with.
Come on now. So again, either way, it doesn't matter what I believe or what I think. But this is what Mark told Curtis, allegedly. And during that conversation, Mark told Curtis that his greatest fear is that Teresa would take their children away from him and that he couldn't afford a custody battle. Because if you remember, Mark is a stay-at-home dad to the children. Teresa makes all the money. So you want to know what insightful, obviously best friend of more than 30 years advice Curtis decides to give Mark?
Hopefully not just kill her.
I mean, not quite. His exact response was the only option he had was for Teresa to die. He didn't say how. He didn't say that he had to do it. But the only way that he wouldn't lose his children is if Teresa died.
Not if he got a job, went to counseling.
Nope. Nothing that a responsible person would say or do. Correct. Which also, I just personally find it terrifying that your friend is talking to you your wedding weekend that he might have to leave his wife and have a custody battle. And your suggestion is to, theoretically, if I give you all the benefit of the doubt in the world, I'm giving every mouse a cookie at this point.
Right.
Is to just wait for her to die and you're supposed to be getting married.
Right. Because if my new husband comes to me and is like, yeah, my best friend is struggling in his marriage, they might be going through bankruptcy. He thinks his wife is cheating. So, you know what I told him? I was like, she just has to die. I'd be like, okay, good thing I can file an annulment within 90 days and there's no issues because I'm leaving.
Absolutely. I'd be like, dang, do I make enough money to go ahead and put that deposit down on the new apartment I'm getting? Like, do I even want to stay here? Is this side of town even good for me? Do I need to move?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's terrifying that you had that thought process the weekend of your wedding. Sorry. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a hopeless romantic, right? That I'm just like, if somebody told me they were having a bad time in their marriage, like at my wedding or part of my wedding festivities, I'd be like, but look at all the love. Exactly. Take all this love home and put it back into your marriage. You guys can do it.
Right. Like, y'all have kids together. Like, I will say, setting aside the fact that we don't necessarily believe Mark's claim that Teresa was having an affair, I will say if the claim was, I think they're cheating, I'd be like, okay, that is a non-negotiable for me. I'd be like, is that a non-negotiable for you? Is that something you can work past? If not, pack it up. Pack it up. You will work through it. Exactly. It might be tough, but you're going to work through it.
Exactly. And when I get home from my honeymoon, I'll send you some boxes and we can get this moving. Mm-hmm. Like,
right. Right. But not death.
Never death. So after Curtis responds by telling Mark that the quote only option, end quote, he had left was for Teresa to die, Mark agreed and hired Curtis to murder his wife in order to maintain custody of their children and claim the life insurance policy that Mark had on Teresa, which totaled somewhere between $4 and $6 million across 5 different policies. And Mark actually promised Curtis at least $100,000 in life insurance payouts and even gave him a $600 deposit for the murder the weekend of his wedding.
Couple things. That is a lot in life insurance money. But I also know some people prefer that. They're like, I want my family to be set. So if Teresa was on board with that, if Mark had similar claims against him, that's fine.
I will say, I'm not saying that amount is warranted, but I think it also depends on how much you make. Yeah. Teresa is the primary breadwinner. There's a certain level of lifestyle that people are expecting to maintain and keep going about when you die, right? And Teresa was a younger woman who had younger children, right?
Mm-hmm. So, I definitely understand. Mm-hmm. It is just a lot. It's just a lot. Especially when your payment is $100,000. If I'm Curtis, I'm like, wait, so your policy about $5 million, you gonna give me $100,000? Can we negotiate? Can we bargain? But I did say, maybe he chose Curtis because he was able to get him that friends and family discount on the hit. And the other thing is a $600 deposit on $100,000 hit. Mm-hmm. Those like Klarna Afterpay kind of deals.
Girl, Klarna wouldn't even give you that much grace. Klarna wouldn't even give you that much grace.
Right.
Klarna would at least make you put up 25%.
Exactly. And we got monthly payments coming in immediately.
And keep in mind, though, this was insurance money payout. So he had to get away with the murder and be ruled not a suspect in order to claim all the policies and then pay out.
Exactly.
And that's just for Curtis. Because remember, there's another idiot in this equation.
That's very true. The other thing is, too, with the life insurance payouts, it is clearly a murder. It is clearly a murder. Mm-hmm. They're definitely going to delay that until they are 100% sure you had nothing to do with it.
It depends on who you get your policies from. Because some companies, I'm not going to say which ones because I don't want to give anybody ideas, some companies have in there that if your significant other is murdered, you can get an initial part of the payout up front. You can't get the whole thing, but you can get part of it up front, even if your significant other is murdered.
Interesting.
Correct.
Still SMH.
So after that weekend, just a couple of weeks after Mark says I do to his new wife, Angela, remember her, the pair, Mark and Curtis, began meticulously planning the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. And the plan was for the murder to take place the weekend after Teresa's mother's birthday, as the whole family was planning to visit Connecticut anyway. Mark then booked Teresa's return ticket alone for Sunday, June 28th, under the guise that this would allow Teresa to get a well-rested evening and ready for the workday that was supposed to happen the next day on Monday. But in reality, it was a ploy ensuring that he and his children were safely in Connecticut for Teresa's mother's birthday, creating an airtight alibi. Mark would go on to instruct Curtis that the murder should occur either on June 28th at the home and be staged as a burglary, or on June 29th at her medical office and staged like a mugging. And not only was Mark giving Curtis options for how the murder needed to take place, he was outright testing theories for him and taking active steps to prepare the house for the invasion story, including, but not limited to, Mark testing out the backyard fence to see if it was too tall to be jumped over, and even trimmed the bushes to create a clean, direct path to the garage. He also provided Curtis with instructions on how to enter the house and disable the security alarm. And if Curtis decided to go with the mugging story, at the medical office, Mark supplied aerial photographs of the wellness center and the stairwell access code. Eventually, Curtis informed Mark that he was going to need help to carry out the murder. However, Mark was very cautious and insisted that he did not want to know the identity of the accomplice. On top of this, Mark and Curtis established a secret communication system using prepaid burner phones, which they had coordinated to activating them only after exchanging a code word on their regular phone lines. However, these dumbasses put in writing what the code word would be. In one of their text messages, Mark wrote, quote, "Since neither of us are likely to carry both with us whenever you want to use the other one, just text me, quote, other close to you," end quote.
Common sense really ain't that common.
Correct. But again, I've embraced this new idea that I actually love stupid murderers.
Yeah.
I love stupid killers because it puts everything in black and white.
Right.
Nothing's confusing. Nobody doesn't know what's going on here because it's right there.
Right.
Because they were dumb enough to say it in writing.
And I'm like, y'all couldn't have talked on the phone and said this?
Of course not. It's more convenient to text about the murder. So as time grew closer to the end of June, Curtis recruited Jimmy as his accomplice. Curtis promised Jimmy a part of the insurance payout. I do not know the amount that it was promised. And you may be wondering, well, why would Curtis recruit Jimmy for the murder of Teresa? I mean, yeah, he's got a criminal record, but it seems to be a weapons violation for some parole type things. Well, that's because Curtis characterized Jimmy as, quote, somebody that would actually do it, end quote. And he further stated that Jimmy had been, quote, involved in other deaths, end quote. Now, again, I couldn't fall down this rabbit hole. So I have no idea what these other deaths are that Jimmy is allegedly connected to or involved in. But some of my sources did say that they believe it's a load of horse and that Jimmy was a talker who liked to brag and boast that he was more important and more dangerous than he actually was.
And that would make a lot of sense.
Exactly.
That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I also do remember that Curtis was essentially Jimmy's protector when they were in jail.
Yep.
So there's that. So in that sense, I understand why Jimmy did it. And keeping in mind that Jimmy might have been, embellishing some of his life stories, it makes sense why Curtis thought Jimmy could do it.
Absolutely. So as you can see, this murder was meticulously planned. And that leads us to the weekend of the murder, as laid out by Curtis Wright. On the morning of June 27th, 2015, Curtis picked up a white Hyundai Elantra rental car in Hillsboro, Missouri, and drove it to pick up Jimmy Ray Rogers in Cadet, Missouri. The two men then embarked on the 1,100-mile, 17-hour drive to Bonita Springs, Florida. They even took photos along the way to make it seem like the trip was a mini vacation if they were ever asked about it. Curtis and Jimmy first arrived at the Sievers home early on Sunday morning, June 28th, at 6 a.m. They entered the home using Mark's code and disabled the alarm at 6:09 a.m. But the pair found the house empty. And this is because Curtis had mixed up the family's travel plans and thought that Teresa was getting back at 11 a.m., not 11 p.m. Since they arrived early, the killers spent the day waiting. They even drove to Teresa's medical office to see if they wanted to commit the murder there, but decided against that location, feeling it was too exposed. So after doing that reconnaissance, they took a nap. They went to the beach and visited a Walmart in Fort Myers, where the two men brought garbage bags, wet wipes, and shoes. At around 10:30 p.m., Curtis and Jimmy returned to the Sievers home. They put their coveralls and gloves that they had brought with them on and used a tool to pry open the side door to stage the scene as a burglary. And then just before 11:25 p.m., Dr. Teresa Sievers arrived home from Southwest Florida International Airport, having flown back alone from Connecticut. As she pulled into the garage and began retrieving her luggage, Curtis began to stalk her. He followed her inside, grabbing a hammer that was lying on the garage freezer. As he entered the kitchen, he stumbled over a dog dish, sending it flying and startling Teresa. According to Jimmy, Teresa turned around and confronted Curtis. But Teresa wasn't scared. She was angry. Jimmy later claimed that Teresa was immediately confrontational, yelling at Curtis for mixing up the dates and criticizing his IT work, telling him that he was fired. It was in that moment that Curtis struck her in the head with the hammer one time. Teresa then put her hands up to defend herself, reportedly asking why, as she began to fight for her life. And again, Curtis hit her with the hammer. After hitting her for a third time, it is at this point that Jimmy joined the attack, using a different hammer to bludgeon her head repeatedly. And Jimmy continued to bludgeon Teresa even after she fell silent on the floor. And he reportedly didn't stop until Curtis made him stop. He would go on to recount at least 17 strikes to Teresa's head. Curtis later threw Teresa's luggage contents around the house in a chaotic manner to stage the burglary. Jimmy wiped down the garage door and Mark's motorcycle handlebars to eliminate fingerprints. The pair then left the home and drove straight back to Missouri, still covered in Teresa's blood.
There are so many things in that. One, the fact that she wasn't even scared seeing him there tells me how much they knew each other. Because if I just get back from the airport and I see somebody inside my house, even if I know them, I'm like, what are you doing here?
Mm-hmm.
But also what Curtis said, she said to him around his IT work being bad and him getting the dates wrong tells me that they maybe had some plans recently for him to come out to Florida and do some work. And maybe he wasn't the IT genius that Mark and Curtis thought he was. Another thing is, it sounds like Jimmy is truly crazy because he don't even know Teresa. So where is the rage coming from him just continuing to hit her?
Correct. And to me, it comes from, and I find that people like Jimmy who do like make up these like grandiose stories about how like, oh yeah, I'm connected to murders and I'm in a gang of some kind. People who make up stuff like that are really insecure.
Right.
Right. And they do that to seem more important and to seem validated by other people. So to me, it's like Jimmy is taking this from perspective of, oh, now I have the opportunity to actually do the things that I make up.
Right.
And I'm going to go so beyond it and everything else so that I can tell stories about it later.
Yeah.
It's a very sick and twisted mindset, but that's what it sounds like to me based on, I know people like Jimmy in real life.
Yeah.
And that's what they do.
And such a big man to kill a woman who was unarmed, kill a woman in her own home, kill a woman who did nothing to you.
Come on now.
You didn't even know. Congratulations.
Right. Do you feel like the big man on campus?
Right.
Because you're actually going to get bullied in jail. Because nobody's gonna take you seriously.
Right.
So you bludgeoned a woman to death in her own home that you didn't know. And you didn't even get anything. You didn't actually burglarize the house. So you literally killed this woman Jimmy specifically, killed this woman for nothing.
Right.
Curtis killed this woman for $600. If we want to be all the way really real about it, we can talk about life insurance payouts and whatever the plan was. He killed that woman for $600.
Right.
So after this interview with Curtis, Mark Sievers was arrested at his home in December of 2015. And after Curtis recorded and sworn and signed this confession in February of 2016, Mark would be indicted in May of 2016 for the first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. So now it's time to get into the subsequent trials. Curtis Wainwright Jr. accepted a plea deal in exchange for providing truthful testimony in the prosecution's case against Jimmy Ray Rogers and Mark Sievers. In exchange for his testimony, Curtis pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 25-year prison sentence. The first trial that took place was for Jimmy Ray Rogers in October of 2019. Prosecutors described the case as, quote, the perfect murder, end quote, and a classic murder-for-hire plot. And they laid out the series of events that I have already described for you. Curtis then testified in the trial that he struck Teresa a total of 3 times, and then Jimmy followed in a frenzied attack with another hammer. However, when it was time for the defense to lay out their case, they argued that Curtis was a known liar who acted alone and that Jimmy did not have a hammer at all. And who better to contradict Curtis' story than Jimmy himself, as he chose to take the stand in his own defense. Jimmy testified that he believed he was going to Florida to help Curtis with computer work and painting at the Seaver house, which is why they brought coveralls and gloves and paint supplies. Jimmy also testified that during the whole ride, Curtis was jittery, high on Adderall, and fluctuated between crying that the murder was an accident caused by his traumatic brain injury and laughing, calling it a, quote, fun game of whack-a-mole, end quote. He proclaimed that he did not have a hammer during the incident and he was merely a witness to what Curtis had done to Teresa.
That's a story.
It is a story.
So let's go along with this story.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know anything about what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Curtis just picked him up and said, hey, you want to come to Florida with me? Do some paint work, do some electrical work, IT work, whatever.
You know,
he said, yeah, that's fun.
Make you a little money. I know you're a felon. It's hard to get a job.
Exactly. And he brought him there to have him do nothing and watch him murder somebody.
Yep. That's the story they're going with.
Got it. So he picked up a witness.
Correct.
All right. Yeah.
Just to make sure that somebody knew he murdered her.
Exactly. That is a story.
It is a story.
Mm-hmm.
And, with one case that has evidence and a story that was presented by the defense, it goes back to the jury. And the jury, after nearly 2 days of deliberation, found Jimmy Ray Rogers guilty of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, it's time for Mark Sievers' trial, which began in November of 2019. And again, the prosecution lay out the case that I have presented for you today, leveraging Curtis's testimony, which was cooperated by the extensive technological evidence, including the burner phone usage, the coded text messages, the GPS tracking, and the state emphasized that Mark Sievers was the catalyst and the cause responsible for orchestrating the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers, even though he was miles away. The prosecution also presented a neighbor named Kimberly, who testified to overhearing an argument where Teresa said, quote, I'm fucking tired of this, end quote, and, quote, I'm leaving, end quote. To which Mark replied, quote, if that's what you want to do, fine, but we'll see about that, end quote. And this neighbor also reported hearing fights and arguments frequently. The defense, however, argued that this entire case hinged on the credibility of Curtis Wright, a confessed killer and liar. The defense highlighted Curtis's 5 inconsistent statements given to police following the murder. They also attempted to paint a dramatically different picture from what the prosecution had presented. And the defense actually suggested in court that Curtis Wright harbored a secret, unrequited sexual infatuation with Mark Sievers, even stating in court, quote, "If Curtis can't have Mark, nobody can," end quote. They claimed that Curtis committed the murder acting out of jealousy and rage and killed Teresa all on his own.
So Curtis drove 17 hours to kill Mark's wife because he said, that is the one thing keeping me from my childhood best friend.
That is the story they're going with.
It is a story.
It is a story. And honestly, I'm going to be real with you. It's better than Jimmy's story.
Yeah. In some respects. Yeah.
In some respects. Look, I could give you closeted gay man potentially kills love rival. That has happened.
I could give you that if they had a sexual or romantic relationship.
Yes. Yes. Again, we're saying what's more believable.
Right.
It's more believable than I was brought to witness a murder and I wasn't even threatened to not say anything.
Yeah. I will say though, honestly, it's equally as believable to me because this is a month after Curtis got married.
True.
So they are both equally as believable, especially because the defense isn't saying, and you know what? My client will stand here today and tell the world that he and Curtis have been having an affair.
Ooh, that would have did it. You might have did something if you could do that.
Exactly.
Might have did something, but there's no way he was going to take the stand.
Yeah.
Mark, I actually don't think is stupid enough to take the stand. I think he's stupid enough to commit a murder and conspire for a murder and think he could get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he's stupid enough to get on the stand.
Agree.
He's not stupid enough to be confronted with what he actually did.
Mm-hmm.
So after closing arguments, the prosecution insisted that Mark Sievers' bizarre behavior and the technological evidence confirmed the conspiracy. And the case was handed to the jury, and they began their deliberations. And the jury returned a verdict in just 4 hours. And on December 4th, 2019, the jury found Mark Sievers guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The penalty phase for Mark Sievers followed very quickly, where the state argued for the death penalty, primarily focusing on the fact that the murder was committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner. The defense asked for leniency and presented mitigating evidence about his loving relationship with his family, especially his children. Teresa's mother and sisters presented victim impact statements detailing the devastating loss and how their lives were forever changed by Mark's actions, and how his children's lives will forever be changed by Mark's actions. The jury, after only 3 hours, unanimously recommended a death sentence.
Because how can you claim to love your children and then take their mother away?
Exactly. And I will say at that point, I know you don't want to admit your guilt because, appeals and whatnot. But to me, it looks really bad to a jury after you've been convicted of the thing to still be like, but I didn't do the thing and I'm a really good dad.
Yeah.
That doesn't work when you have been convicted of killing
their mother in a cold and calculated way.
Right.
Planning out her murder.
Right. When she didn't do anything to you.
She didn't do anything to you.
You never presented evidence that she was financially abusing you or physically abusing you.
Or even having the affair.
You presented nothing that would make me feel like, well, he felt the need to protect himself or something, to give a mouse a cookie.
Right.
Nothing. This woman did nothing to you but provide you a life you clearly didn't deserve. So during the sentencing hearing on January 3rd, 2020, Mark Sievers read a statement continuing to assert his innocence. He pleaded for mercy, saying, quote, "Our girls have tragically lost their mommy, and now they're about to lose their daddy as well. I respectfully ask the court for life as not to compound their loss and suffering, end quote. The court noted that his children did not want the death penalty imposed on their father, which is completely understandable. At the end of the day, he is convicted of taking their mother, but he is their father.
Right.
And do you actually want to lose both of your parents?
Right. And how old are the children at this point?
They're teenagers.
Okay. Yeah. So they're old enough to understand what it means. But I agree. At the end of the day, you might dislike him a lot, but that doesn't mean you want to see him dead, which is more than he offered your mother.
Hello. It's more than what he deserves. His children showed him the grace that he was not willing to show their mother.
Exactly.
His children are showing him the grace that he doesn't deserve. However, Judge Bruce Kyle noted Mark's positive relationship with his family was undercut by his decision to procure the murder of his children's mother, and ultimately sentenced Mark Sievers to death for the first-degree murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers, and a consecutive 30-year prison sentence for the conspiracy to commit the murder of Dr. Teresa Sievers. Judge Kyle remarked, quote, "I judge people's actions. I don't judge people's souls," end quote. Where you go is between you and whoever you believe created you.
Right.
As of 2025, Mark Sievers remains on Florida's death row at Union Correctional Institution. Since his conviction, he has continuously fought the ruling, and his lawyers have filed multiple motions for a new trial shortly after sentencing, which was promptly denied in 2020. He also went on to file an appeal for his conviction, which the Supreme Court of Florida affirmed the conviction and the death sentence on November 17th, 2022. 2 weeks later, Mark filed a motion for a rehearing. In February of 2025, a judge granted Mark Sievers an evidentiary hearing to re-examine his claims, primarily focusing on his claims of ineffective assistance of counsel and insufficient evidence. During a recent post-conviction relief hearing in October of 2025, Mark's co-conspirator, Jimmy Ray Rogers, took the stand. Jimmy still maintained his innocence, claiming he was never informed about the murder plans and had no role in Teresa's murder, and that Mark Sievers was not involved at all. It is important to note that Jimmy Ray Rogers is also currently trying to appeal his own conviction and hoping for a new trial, and the case is still pending as we speak, as Mark awaits for a ruling in this recent trial. Despite the fact that Mark's former attorney, Michael Mummert, and Mark's stepmother believing that Mark is innocent and maintaining that the verdict was based on one man's lie, that man being Curtis, Teresa's sister, Lisa, remains resolved, believing that justice has been served and that the current hearings will not mitigate his life sentence or grant him a new trial. She is determined to keep Teresa's legacy alive as the, quote, wonderful, incredible, amazing doctor she was, end quote. Dr. Teresa Sievers was widely recognized as a brilliant, loving, kind, and funny woman, and a highly successful holistic physician. She was a dedicated mother of two. Her energy was often described by her loved ones, who referred to her as a, quote, dynamo and spitfire, end quote. Teresa was constantly trying to help people, prompting her mother to lovingly refer to her as, quote, a modern day Mother Teresa, end quote. And her family mourned her as, quote, the light of our lives, the star of our family, end quote. And that is the end of our story, friend.
Rest in peace to Teresa, and I am hoping the best for her children, for her mother, for her sister, for her family and friends and loved ones, because it's already tough losing somebody. It's even harder when you lose somebody in such a violent way. And then you are trying to go through the healing process and having the person you know to be responsible still claiming their innocence and dragging it out. Because when those appeals happen, that is also the opportunity to come back to that and re-interview and re-give your statement of how this impacted you. And it's like you could never let that wound truly close up. So definitely wishing them nothing but strength and peace as they work through this and try to live their lives without Teresa, while also still recognizing and remembering the impact that she had on them.
Absolutely. I wish them nothing but the best. I wish her children so much healing.
Right.
No child deserves to deal with this. No child deserves to have to deal with the internal struggle of my father killed my mother.
Right.
And I have to deal with that and grow with that. And I hope that they are connected to people who love them, people who love their mother, people who believe in facts and evidence. And I hope that just Teresa's entire family and anybody who is touched by her spirit and hurt by her loss finds healing. Because again, she meant so much to not just her family, but to her patients. And her patients meant the world to her as well.
Rest in peace, Teresa. And we're sending nothing but love and strength and support to your loved ones, and to Mark, Curtis, and Jimmy. I hope you have the life that you deserve. Nothing more, nothing less.
I could go for a little less.
Well, I think they deserve nothing.
I can go for less than nothing. We can figure out a way.
Right.
Negatives are a thing.
I hope you have the life you deserve.
Absolutely.
So, as we wrap up today's discussion, we are going to move into our segment called Today in Crime, where we'll discuss a crime or crime-related event that took place on this day. So on this day, November 28th, 1994, Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered in prison. Serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who was serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the brutal murders of 15 men, was beaten to death by a fellow inmate while performing cleaning duty in a bathroom at the Columbia Correctional Institute Gymnasium in Portage, Wisconsin. During a 13-year period, Jeffrey Dahmer, who lived primarily in the Midwest, murdered at least 17 men. Most of these men were young, gay, and black, and Dahmer lured them back to his home, promising to pay them money to pose nude for photographs. Dahmer would then drug and strangle them to death and occasionally cannibalize their bodies. Jeffrey Dahmer was finally arrested on July 22, 1991, and entered a plea of guilty but insane in 15 of the 17 murders he confessed to committing. In February 1992, the jury found him sane in each murder, and he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences. 2 years later, Dahmer was killed at the age of 34 by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver, who also fatally beat the third man on their work detail, inmate Jesse Anderson. Scarver's motive in killing the two men is not entirely clear. However, in his subsequent criminal trial, he maintained that God told him to kill Jeffrey Dahmer and the other inmate. Scarver, who was already serving a life term for murder, was sentenced to additional life terms and transferred to a federal prison. And that is what happened on this day. If you found this story interesting, leave a scales of justice emoji in the comments.
I really don't have anything to say about that man. I hope he's burning in hell.
Yes.
I hope it's hot. And that's about it.
And I hope that everything he did to those people, he is reliving every single waking moment in hell.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts, friend?
Nope, that's all I got.
Thank you to our listeners for joining us on today's episode. I'd also like to thank Court TV, 48 Hours, and Law and Crime Network for providing most of the material for this episode. If you'd like to check out photos related to this case, be sure to follow us at Criminalish Podcast on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok.
Listeners, if you like what you hear, be sure to tell a friend and leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to the Criminalish Podcast. And if you are listening on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel and feel free to leave any comments or questions. As always, stay nosy, my friends. Bye.